Hey, I know I started a video moaning about my film choices only a couple months ago, but yeah, I'm about to do it again. Sorry, I just can't help myself. Sometimes I get bored and can't find anything I want to watch, so I go check out what's new in theaters, and it just so happened that recently, the newest thing out was, well, Despicable Me 4. Now, did I want to go see it? Not really. But did I end up enjoying myself? Hell no! It was disjointed, unfocused, slow, nothing happened, no one changed by the end of it. It was honestly one of the most mind-numbing experiences I've ever been through. In fact, there were some bits of yellow goo that started leaking from my ear after it ended, so I think I may have actually developed a brain tumor due to constant exposure. Either that or it was a minion growing there, but yeah, there isn't that much of a difference, so what does it even matter? And okay, I know what you're thinking. Wow, Braxton, you don't like the Minions? How original. Yeah, I know. It's been played out since 2015. People have been hating on Minions for longer than half of you have been alive, but I don't hate them for the same reason most do. You see, I'm not mad about their marketability or the stupidly simple cutesiness of their designs. As far as the commercial side of their appeal goes, I really couldn't care less. No, what I hate about Minions, especially with this newest installment in the Despicable Me cinematic universe, is that they, to me, embody every wrong decision you could possibly make with Mascot characters. And when I say that, I'm not talking about sports mascots or brand mascots. I'm talking about a very specific type you see in movies, TV, comics, and games that essentially act as the representative for whatever property they come from. Like, if you wanted to pick out a franchise without seeing the main lead, they'd be the first one you think of. Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, Teddy from Persona 4, that stupid Rosie O'Donnell ape from Tarzan. The ones who aren't even close to being the main dude, most of the time getting relegated to the role of comic relief, but end up doing all the heavy lifting for merchandise the leads of the series never could. Those are the guys I mean when I say mascots, and Minions have gotta be the worst example I can think of. Of course, there have been others over the years, Snarf, Gurgi, Orpho, any of Illumination's other attempts at recreating Minions, but here's the thing, none of them are nearly as recognizable, none of them have left anywhere close to as big of an impact as the Minions have, and that's why I hate them. Because when the average person tends to think about mascots, their first thought is the Minions, and that pisses me off, since there's so much more that can be done with these guys when given the chance. They aren't inherently a bad idea. Sure, they might have been born to sell toys and plushes and whatever else you can stick their faces on, but that doesn't mean they're doomed from the get-go. It's all in how the creators behind a property choose to use them, and they can be used right in just as many ways as they can be used wrong, or they could be something in between. This isn't a black and white issue, it exists on a spectrum, the autism spectrum, and I want to demonstrate just how wide that spectrum is by going through every mascot variant I can think of from worst to best, measuring their pros and cons, to show there's more to these guys than just the Minions. Though, speaking of, number 1, the franchise parasite. But first, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, PrizePicks, a simplified daily fantasy sports app that makes playing for cash as simple as tapping more or less, and that's not an exaggeration. With PrizePicks' easy-to-understand, intuitive interface, all it takes to get started with making entries is picking 2 or more players of whatever sport you fancy and strategizing to your heart's content. And it's fast, too. It's so simple even I can get into it, and I don't know anything. But what I do know is that if you're interested, you can go to prizepicks.com/onelink.me/IVHR/JustStop and use code JustStop for a first deposit match up to $100. Thanks to PrizePicks for sponsoring, and on with the video. Okay, so during that opening rant, I didn't really explain what it is about the Minions that makes them the worst of the worst in terms of mascots, so to answer that question as simply as I can here, they overstep their boundaries and are continually feeding off more and more of the franchise they spawned from. See, in the beginning of the Despicable Me franchise, the Minions, frankly, weren't that hateable. I mean, yeah, they were generic as far as villainous henchmen go, lacking any individuality or greater cognitive function, but they did have a purpose in the story. The main character Gru is a villain who's kind of incompetent, so he needed kind of incompetent workers running his operations. It fit with his theme while visually conveying what he was about, and the Minions did their job with very minimal focus put on them outside of when they were needed. I wouldn't quite say they were good mascots, but they weren't terrible, and in the second film especially, they actually added to the weight of the story by being key to the villain's plan, acting as his mutated army, so their additional scenes in that film didn't feel totally pointless. But then everything changed when they got their own movie. An act you'd think would maybe signal a further separation between Despicable Me and the Minions to help them feel like unique things, when in reality, that couldn't be any further from the truth. Since this movie wasn't done to help the Minions thrive on their own, it was to justify their gradual takeover of the next few Despicable Me films, slowly getting longer and longer subplots with no relation to the rest of the story, choosing to remove them from the spot they were meant to fill as Gru's henchmen to be idle contestants, prisoners, superheroes, or whatever other random nonsense the writers could think of. And that's the moment I really personally started hating them. When I realized they'd transformed from insignificant distractions with a purpose to parasitic leeches feeding off the host. There's no symbiosis anymore. The Minions don't provide anything to anyone. They solely exist to be in all the marketing material, eat up the runtime, and slowly but surely convert everything they touch to mush. Think that's hyperbolic? Look at the plot of Despicable Me 4. Oh wait, you can't. It wasn't there. It was just a bunch of vaguely connected vignettes that went nowhere but existed anyway for the sake of shitty jokes. Sound familiar? I'll give you a hint. It's exactly like the Minions movie. I rest my case. The Minions are precisely what you don't want from mascots. Soulless, purposeless, and in the end, they're gonna keep eating and eating until Gru and the others become minions themselves. And I'm not looking forward to seeing that happen, but it will. Number 2. The Waste of Space. Alright, so from here on, I'm gonna be moving up from infectious diseases to actual cast members with individual qualities, but to clarify before we continue, please don't get it confused. These guys might be one step above the franchise parasites since they don't consume the works they're attached to from the inside like those bugs that replace the tongues of fish, but that doesn't mean they aren't hateable, just slightly less so. As the name suggests, these types of mascots don't exactly take over the film or provide any significant input that damages the end product, but god damn it, they have no business being here. Perhaps they're a comic relief that isn't funny, or a little buddy sidekick that only speaks in catchphrases. Maybe they're a silent animal or robot or alien type thing that can't speak and doesn't do anything over the film, but gosh darn it, they're so cute, except not really. Basically, they're beings who might have technically been made for a reason other than selling merch, but whatever that reason is, it ends up falling flat. So all you're left with when that gimmick doesn't work is a one-dimensional worn-out gag that continues pushing that worn-out gag for way longer than anything you would have considered acceptable. Want an example? Look at anything Disney's done in the last decade. Hey Hey, the derpy chicken from Moana, Splat, the blob thing from Strange World, or how could I forget my personal favorite, Valentino, the talking goat from Wish, who you probably didn't know the name of until this very moment. All of them forgettable, all inconsequential, all made with nothing but merchandise on the mind, and the worst part, all given arbitrary relevance at one point or another to justify their existence. It's actually something they did with the Minions too, having them show up after their dumb adventures to help a bit in the climax and prove they weren't absolutely worthless. The only difference for the Waste of Space is they're around for the main plot, so they can maybe squeeze one or two more extra things in there, like finding a doorway or silently alerting the cast in a way they comically misinterpret. You know the deal. It's never enough to make up for how much of a, waste of space they are, but to the staff who couldn't bother giving these guys more of a role, it's enough for them to be satisfied. And it's that half-heartedness that makes them so groan-worthy to me, like, wow, you really did something there, huh, buddy? Guess I can't get mad at you being here now, but I definitely can, and I definitely will. You're not gonna gaslight me, movie. I won't eat the pods, I won't live in the bugs, you hear me? Number 3. The minor annoyance. And thus we've come to the last sort of negative variant of the mascots, though in this case it's less of a burning wrath that gives you a hunch from looking down in anger so much, and more of a mildly annoyed disappointment that gives you a headache from rolling your eyes, cause I don't hate the minor annoyance. Annoyment? What the fuck? I don't hate the minor annoyances. They don't get my blood pumping in the same way as the others do, and that's for the reason that most of the time, unlike the Waste of Space or franchise parasites, they do have active roles in the story, whether it's being a guide for the cast or providing some service/information they wouldn't get by without, but at the same time, they also aren't that good as characters, and about half the time, the script kinda knows it. Like, they're aware this guy isn't that engaging. Sure, he's got a use that's needed by the rest of the cast, so technically he's not useless, but the levity he's bringing isn't quite drawing people in. Some audiences enjoy him, but loads are saying he's a little annoying, so as a last-ditch effort at making sure you like him right as the story's reaching its climax, that one half of self-aware writers will just let them die, or come close to dying, or make some sort of meaningful sacrifice, whatever. Just anything that'll hopefully make you go, "Aw, man, I guess that guy was cool all along. He was super important, apparently. You don't know what you're missing until it's gone." That's the reaction they want to see, but I'm sorry, no I'm not. When these supposed to be heavy scenes get handed to these mid-ass mascots, I do not care. I didn't tear up when Bing Bong died. There was no mourning for Olaf the first or second time he presumably died. Shaman leaving Ash, not a fuck to give. Star getting captured, none of my concern. Every single time, I was more or less indifferent since they didn't leave a strongly positive impact on me up to that moment. They merely provided a service while giving jokes that barely ever landed. I had no incentive to care. You can't gaslight me into thinking they were worthwhile using cheap tricks. You need to earn that. For the other half of this trope, when the writers don't pull the sacrifice shit, I'm not quite as pessimistic about their existence, but either way, they're never quite as strong or worthwhile as the narrative wants you to think they are. Most often, they're simply minor annoyances, and when they aren't that, they're usually number 4, the MacGuffin. Now, this is where we get to the true middle point of the spectrum, where these mascots aren't necessarily bad, but the writers still don't feel the need to make them that complex either. As the title suggests, these types of mascots are most often used in their respective properties as a living MacGuffin, which, for those of you who don't know media terms, is an important object the characters in a story are looking to get or destroy, or something to that effect due to its significance. Or, in other words, it's a thing both the heroes and villains want, so it gets them to fight. All that changes with the MacGuffin mascot is that now they're sentient, and that tends to be used as an extra moral factor in determining who's the good or bad guy. Take the puppies from 101 Dalmatians or Polly from Pirates Band of Misfits. The major conflicts of both of these films hinge on the idea that snobby rich people want to kill innocent, cutesy living creatures to wear or eat or some other nefarious thing PETA's gonna whine about. They don't exactly have much personality, so it's hard to get personally attached to the mascots themselves, but they're cute and have a clear worth to the rest of the cast, so we sorta care about them by proxy. That's why they're dead center of the chart. They've got a function, they don't overstay their welcome, they do their job of being cute and funny and mildly amusing, but they're also not characters, they're objects. The fact they're alive is just a gimmick to make them slightly more sympathetic than MacGuffins that aren't alive. It's a perfectly acceptable method that works for the stories they're used in, but at the end of the day, they haven't got shit on number 5, the ones who have their own urgency. Yeah, I couldn't think of a proper name to give these guys, but you get what I'm going for. These guys are the mascots who, besides acting cute and cracking one-liners and having one special skill to keep them relevant, genuinely matter as living, breathing characters in their own right. And there are a couple clever ways writers have done this while infusing elements from the other sections without including the parts that made them terrible. Doug from the movie Up, for instance, has the minor annoyance trait of making sacrifices for main leads Carl and Russell, but instead of these moments being there to show how much you should love Doug, despite generally not contributing to the story, him betraying his master and pack feed into a character arc of him standing up for himself. At the start, he's meek and submissive, giving into the bullying of his stronger packmates in the face of protecting his newfound friends, but as it keeps going, he ends up growing a spine, showing more courage than anyone else in the film, and it gains him the respect of the pack as well as the love of his friends. See that? That's growth! An element I feel the need to point out, seeing as pretty much every other mascot before this point never heard of it. And that's not the only thing they can subvert. Morgana from Persona 5 makes for an interesting spin in that he starts out with the trait of providing an essential service, being his crew the Phantom Thieves' main transportation, burglar, and intel, but once most of those factors get supplanted by other members, rather than fading away into obscurity as several mascots like Olaf and Toad from the Mario Bros. Movie
movie tend to do, he actually points this out in-game, and although it leads to one of the more messy portions of Persona 5, if I'm being honest, it still contributes well to his personal arc of rediscovering who he is. And more than that, it's a great subversion of how the mascot's worth often runs out after a certain point, using that factor to give Morgana extra depth, another word the rest of these guys never heard of before. But then again, if we really want to talk about depth beyond what mascots can provide in the way of their own arcs, we'll have to move on to number 6, the mirrors. And what is it that puts these guys at the highest point? 2 words: thematic parallels. Because these mascots aren't just well developed on their own, they're integral to the growth of the main character or the message of the story. It wouldn't function if it weren't for them being around. And I don't mean that in an arbitrary sense, like guiding them through a foreign world or unlocking some great power. As a matter of fact, all the examples I have are of guys who, physically and practically speaking, are limited in what they can do. Perito from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, Mushu from Mulan, the box trolls from, well, take a guess. None of these guys are super strong or have any particularly helpful talents. To the contrary, most of the time they end up being kinda easy targets, but what they lack in practical use they make up for in the depth they can help give. On the side of one helping the other, Perito mirrors Puss, who believes he's lost everything and desperately needs to get it back, by showing that the right attitude and perspective can help him appreciate what's currently around over chasing things he'll never get back. For more of a back and forth development, Mushu mirrors Mulan, who's looking to join the army despite being a woman for selfless reasons, by being selfish at first, hoping to save his own place as a guardian for her family, but coming to see the error of his ways and cheering her on while she encourages him. And finally, for those mascots whose influence goes beyond just the lead and themselves to reach everyone in the story, the box trolls mirror their messed up, superficial society that believes things can only be a certain way, subverting the people's expectations by being skilled inventors, kind, and finding the courage to leave their boxes when pushed hard enough. They and all the other mascots mentioned were able to positively contribute to not only their own development, but the development of the cast around them. And what's special about that as a mascot is they didn't have to do it through gimmicks or phony sacrifices or last-minute saves, but through the natural role they were meant to play in the work. And I know, for most characters, at least well-written ones, that sounds almost basic, but that's just what I've been trying to convey with this video. Most mascots aren't treated like characters, they're seen as lesser or not as important, and thanks to franchise parasites like the Minions who get brought into whatever they're used for with no cohesion while raking in literal billions of dollars doing it, mascots getting treated so poorly by the script is seemingly becoming the norm. After all, the average audience member expects them to be there for a cheap laugh in between all the real action anyway, so why even try? Who cares about setting an example when the prime moneymaker doesn't give a fuck? But it's precisely when those trends start popping up that people should care, when they should remember that every element in a narrative is important, especially the characters, and that sentiment shouldn't be exempt when it comes to mascots. Obviously, not every character has to be as complex as the rest, and if you want the equivalent of a dog that's mainly around for laughs, feel free to have it. But don't make them the face of the property. They're not a brand. They're a part of a cast. And if you want one guy in that cast to represent all the marketing and merchandise of your work, shouldn't they represent the themes too? Shouldn't they have real significance? Shouldn't they be a character? I know it's not technically necessary, but still, there's so much potential just waiting to be explored with the mascots, same as any of the leads, and the mirrors and the ones with their own urgency prove that fact. They show what mascots can be when done right and treated with respect. It's not impossible. You just gotta try. I've been Just Stop. You've been served. You're expected to appear in court next week. And thanks for watching.